What's the good word, Josh? Your boy DKB here. I want to take another look at our practice squad and talk about some of the players I haven't addressed through, the undrafted free agent series or on the fly elsewhere. And this is actually one of our international pathway program players in tackle Obinna Eze. He's a really interesting watch for the traits that he brings to the field, obviously from a physical perspective, versus the technical ability that he actually possesses, right? Now, he's still pretty young, 25 years old, coming in at 6'6" and about 320-ish pounds. So it's not out of the question that he can still find time to develop and then actually be able to go out there and get himself a, successful contract extension or something along those lines. But I'm caught somewhere in between of him just being a guy that's out there for the sake of picking up some snaps, and this being a guy along the lines of maybe like a Jordan Mailata if he finally takes to some of the coaching here, right? The biggest issue I've seen with him is that you can see improvements all the way from his time with Memphis up until even as recent as him being on the Lions practice squad and playing in their preseason. But it's not leaps and bounds better, right? It's not to the degree that you say he's completely eliminated certain weaknesses that he's had, or he's strengthened certain positive aspects to his game, so much so that some of the weaknesses don't necessarily matter as much because the good is outweighing the bad. So I'll let you guys, determine that for yourself. But diving into a bit of his background, right now, he's coming from Nigeria, as mentioned. He's part of the International Pathway Player Pathway Program. So he was that 17th player, right? Before, completely forgot about this program, and I was wondering why we had 17, but he fills that slot. He was a former 4-star recruit. He did this in a matter of 1 year, right? He's fairly new to basketball when you talk about him picking it up in 2016. Did I say basketball? Fairly new to football, picking it up in about 2016. Has a former basketball background, right? That's what he ended up coming to the States for. That's what he kind of got acknowledged for talent-wise. And then he fell in love with football pretty quickly. There tends to be a lot of overlap in between football guys playing basketball or at least earlier on in high school, basketball guys trying out to play football. But started out at Memphis. 3 years. He had recruits he had offers from a ton of other schools, from my understanding, the LSUs of the world, the Ole Misses, Alabama, for example. Opted to go to Memphis, went there for 3 years, transfers to TCU for a year, and then he ends up going undrafted in the 2022 draft class. But this is essentially an overall project, right? When you look at this guy, you almost have to look at him as if you're starting from scratch, with only seeing the bare minimum of what a guy is capable of doing, just stepping out there on the field for the first time, right? I've heard and seen that his ceiling may be ultimately just being a swing tackle if he can fulfill certain elements of his game. The floor probably could end up being a dollar store, stock clerk or something somewhere, right? He does have 37 starts at left tackle to his name. I do love the fact that he chose to transfer to TCU. He wanted to try to build on elements of his game, right? He's always been known as a quietly better pass protector, but at his size, he needs to be able to bring that run element to his game as well. TCU being heavy on RPOs, a run-heavy offense overall, and you do see parts of that actually start to improve in his game. But this is all about a guy that just brings rare ability, right? Now, a lot of the oohs and ahs go to when you hear a guy coming out of the bus at 6'6+. But to be honest, no matter what position on the offensive line you are, being extremely tall isn't that much of a plus, right? Now, you don't necessarily want to be small for your position height-wise, but being too tall is almost a hindrance, right? Pad level issues, natural leverage. Some guys don't have the body built up to the measurements of their actual build, if that makes any sense. So you have guys that have weaker cores or guys that aren't getting in there on leg days, different things like that. I don't look at that as a plus with Obinna, but what I do think stand out is that he has absolutely rare length, right? Arm length and wingspan is absolutely ridiculous. He has the arms of a guy that's definitely 7 foot plus. Like, just imagine my wrestling folks like the great Khali rolling out there on Sundays every day. You love to see it. This is something that gets an offensive line coach extremely happy because worst case scenario, if they pan out, it is what it is. But to get your hands on a guy that should always be able to make first contact is a huge plus. And then you can really build around some other fundamentals of the game. But he brings that rare length. He has a good ability to climb to the second level. So you see a lot of those basketball traits on display when it comes to some pretty solid-ish footwork, right? Acceleration and be able to, the ability to go out there and burst off the line of scrimmage at certain times. His head doesn't really dip in pass protection at all, which tends to be a problem for a lot of tall guys. He uses his length to connect first. I would pretty much estimate that 98% of the time at minimum he's probably being the first guy to establish meaningful contact. I wish the hands were a little bit stronger and stuff. We'll talk about some of the opportunities in this game here in a bit. He has a two-hand push that creates a lot of movements on angle blocks. He's an interesting guy because if I was to look at him and after a couple games, I would say that he'd probably be best in like a power gap block scheme like the one we're transitioning to. But there's definitely a lot of points of his game that point to him probably being a plus in a West Coast type offense as well, where you're looking to get to markers and open up lanes as opposed to fighting a guy mano a mano in a gap setting. So he has a blend to be able to play both. It's just that there's not really any consistent parts to his game. He has the athleticism to be a pulling blocker, which is a huge plus. So he can get out there and make plays on the opposite side, to the other end of the tackle or guard or, whatever landmarker he needs to get to on the play side. Can flip his hips, direct defenders outside of the pocket. So one of the best parts about his game when everything lines up is that he can shut down moves to the inside and he'll force a guy to what you'll hear called in the scouting community as run the ring, right? And if you want to think about some of those drills you've seen where there's like a hula hoop and they're having a guy transition left to right all around the ring, it's kind of the same thing in theory, right? You want a guy to have to absolutely run around the planet to try to come in and make an impossible play on the quarterback if they have some freakish bend or something, right? So at his best, he definitely can pull that off. He keeps his elbows tucked, which allows for him to be able to explode and land very effective blows whenever he would need to consistently to reset a guy, stymie him, put a bull rush, etc. into a stalemate. And he does a pretty solid job of being able to attack. He can disengage from that guy, and then he can go out there to the second level and stack some blockers up. So there are some impressive elements here. That's going to be a consistent theme, right? The name of the game with Obinna is where is really his foundational skill set and how do we get those elements to be more fundamental, right? Again, worst case scenario, he's not in the NFL in a couple of years. But even at average, right, if you can just pull out some of this stuff, you are talking about a reliable swing tackle that can pull out probably 300 to 400 reps in a season, right, which would be more than you would probably ideally want to see. But I can see him definitely being a low-end starter if he just hits on a couple of these opportunities that we're going to talk about. One of the things I will note before diving into this, and I think this was a huge bit of information to let you guys know, is kind of a progress marker on where he's been from college to at least spending a full season in the NFL. Dan Campbell, his former Lions head coach, was mentioning this as a quote, right, when talking about his progress. Yeah, listen, Obi has a ton of length, pretty good athlete. He's got to learn to be a pro as far as it pertains to practicing. This stuff gets hard, man. It's hard when you're that big, that long. It's not always easy to bend for 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Those are little things he's got to work on, is staying in the fundamentals of it when he starts getting tired. But we like his ability. He's a good dude. He's pretty smart, but he's got to get in the NFL football shape and grind through it. If he does that, he's got a future here. And one of the things that I always appreciate about certain head coaches, I won't say franchises, right, because it's kind of a culture thing that gets instilled. Dan Campbell, you remember his infamous pressure speech about having hard-nosed football guys, biting kneecaps and all that good stuff. There was obviously some element of that he's seen in a guy like Eze, even if we're talking about UDFA, caliber guys, right? And for what it's worth, the Lions did offer him, I think it was about $155,000 or so, guaranteed to bring him in, which was one of the highest amounts of that particular draft cycle. But getting into some of the ops, he has a lack of coordination for mirroring. So one of the strangest pieces to me that when I was understanding his background in basketball, not all of that translates to the football field, right? There is you can take a look at him doing drills in the combine. There's some very weird like stop and go ability where when heavy feet, right? He plants his foot in the ground, takes him a full 5 seconds, it feels like, to be able to transition back to the other side. There's going to be weight distribution issues, a whole lot of other things, but he doesn't have a ton of coordination for mirroring, and that's one of the things that I feel like can stop him almost immediately from becoming anything close to seeing the NFL field during a regular season game. His pad level tends to be exposed pretty often. This keeps him from being able to sustain blocks as frequently as he should. He has a odd build as well, and maybe it's part of the transition from basketball to football, but a thin lower frame, so he definitely looks like another guy that's kind of skipped leg day. Generates a ton of power from the upper body, but there's a huge disconnect between the upper and lower body being able to bend, torsion, flexibility, being able to bring power from the ground up, getting displaced very easily. A ton of things that need to get reworked there. Suffers from you don't even have to be an experienced or well versatile defender, right? He falls for a ton of stutters, hesitations from defenders to be able to set him up and attack that inside. Contact balance is below average. Loses balance pretty often due to overextending as well, which should really be a non-factor in his tape when you consider the rarity and wingspan that he's working with. He should just be able to, hold these bad boys out and just wait for the guy to come in and hold his ground and figure out how he wants to manipulate him. But feet can become stale after contact. This makes him very susceptible to things like spin moves and obviously the speed guys that he tends to struggle with quite a bit. But when I look at him, it's not all terrible news, right? A lot of the pro comps that I can see off top would be a guy like Cornelius Lucas, but one of the ones I've seen that I think is spot on for a guy that brought a lot of the same, kind of traits and maybe athleticism level was LaRaven Clark. So there's definitely a pathway to this guy turning into something. And I'm still pretty high on what Keith Carter can do with a lot of these guys. So we'll see how quick he can try to build himself up with these flight school reps and all of that. But 2023 stats in preseason left a little bit to be desired, but you take a look at what he did with the Lions in 3 preseason games, 76 snaps, most of those coming at left tackle, but he did get some on the right side, and then finished with some PFF grades, 50.3 overall, a 71.2 pass block grade, so solid enough. But that run block grade was 26.7, and even in this preseason with the Jets, he had, I believe it was like a 50.8 or a 50 smack dab PFF grade. So for what it's worth, huge developmental project here. But, I think last year we didn't really use an IPP spot, right? The pathway player position. I was begging for us to get one, right? Because I do love the prospect of what the Eagles did with Jordan Mailata and bunch of other guys that you can see coming out of that program that's really done well over the years. Hopefully we can find another stud somewhere. It would be nice to see a guy like Eze be able to work his way up and maybe challenge for, tackle number 4 next year or something like that. But let me know what you guys think. I don't know where he falls. He can fall anywhere on the spectrum, right? He can be challenging at least for a rotation play next year, or we can end up losing him before the season even starts, right? I remember like Ryan Swoboda being another guy before that I didn't really love whatsoever, but he was a tall, big guy, brought some crazy traits as well. So we'll see. I'll look forward to you guys' comments though and catch you again. Peace.